All right, thanks everyone for sticking around for the last session. Been much awaiting the title of my talk. I'll be talking about lifetime spectroscopy today, which is a defect characterization technique that's used to measure the lifetime limiting defect in a material. So potentially able to tell you what defect in the bulk is limiting your efficiency at the bulk level. I'll be talking about it in the context of the current standard technique for doing these types of measurements, which is deep level transient spectroscopy. So before talking about that, I want to talk about single junction efficiency limits. Thankfully, Jacob did a good job introducing that, and I want to talk specifically about how defect-assisted recombination plays a role in preventing us from reaching the limits of efficiency. So if we look at the detailed balance limit, or the Shockley-Queisser limit as it's often referred to, we see the limiting efficiency, which is the slack line, and how the single junction technologies line up against that curve. So we see that silicon technologies, these two dots here, are doing pretty well approaching the theoretical limits, as are the gallium arsenide materials. Whereas these thin film technologies like cadmium telluride and SIGs have a long way to go, and especially the amorphous silicon technologies. So if these are limited at the bulk level, and we can figure out what specific defect is limiting the efficiency, by getting rid of that, we can get closer and closer towards the limiting efficiency. So one of the conditions to actually reach the limiting efficiency is that all of the recombination in your device is purely radiative. So any non-radiative recombination, like when we absorb a photon and it recombines across the band gap, releasing heat, releasing phonons instead of photons. Anytime that happens, it actually reduces, we lose carriers, and it reduces the combination, the efficiency below the limiting efficiency. So characterizing these defects in terms of where they lie in the band gap and the probability for them to capture either an electron or hole, which we represent by these cross sections, is of value to defining these defects that limit our efficiency at the bulk level. And specifically, they can be used to identify it. So what is it? And then the next step is how can we get rid of it so that we can keep pushing to higher and higher efficiencies. So the current standard method for characterizing these defects is called deep level transient spectroscopy. And it's a capacitive technique where you have some depletion width, which can be in the PN junction or in the Schottky diode, and you apply a voltage pulse, which shrinks that depletion width. And then you basically watch that depletion width open back up again, and that's dependent on the rate of emission of electrons from the trap states. And so what you end up seeing is this transient in the capacitance that you measure, and you look at that with respect to temperature and get this overwhelming set of data. So it's nice to have a lot of information sometimes, but unfortunately from this kind of measurement we get the energy depths that we wanted, and we get the emission cross sections that we wanted, but we don't know which one of these defects is actually limiting the efficiency of our device. So you can do a comparable measurement by actually looking at the lifetime itself. So if you measure the lifetime by photoluminescence decay or photoconductance decay, and look at how it depends on, say, temperature and injection level, you can extract information about the defects from it. So it's nice because you only get information. I mean, it's a limitation, but it's also a nice limitation because you only get information about the lifetime limiting defect. So you only get information about the specific defect that's limiting your efficiency. And also because the lifetime is proportional to not just the density of your defect, but also the cross-section. It's this product. You can actually detect defects below the level, detection level of deep level transient spectroscopy. So we can go beyond that technique in terms of the sensitivity and in terms of what we can make out of the outcome. So the lifetime, as I mentioned, is dependent on this, the energetic position of that trap and what's called the asymmetry ratio. So the ratio of the cross sections for capture of electron and holes. And we can extract that by varying the temperature, by varying the doping, and by varying the injection level. So how many carriers we put into the system. So just focusing at the temperature variation, I'll just quickly show you two simulations. This one shows that as I increase the temperature, so moving towards the left here, the lifetime goes through an radius increase, and the slope of that increase is related to the depth of the trap. So these numbers are how deep the trap is in the band gap. So from the slope of that, you can extract the trap depth. And then if you know the trap depth, then from where the onset temperature is here, you can extract the asymmetry ratio. So the ratio between the capture cross sections of electrons and holes. So that sort of gives you a fingerprint of the defect that's limiting the efficiency that you can compare to literature and determine what specific crystallographic defect you're talking about and try to get rid of that in the material. So this is a technique that was developed at the Fraunhofer, and they did work with molybdenum contaminated samples, with titanium contaminated samples, iron, nickel. So this is just showing a sample experimental result where we see the Arrhenius increase. They also studied the boron-oxygen defect. So this is a metastable defect that can give you, even in high efficiency cells, it can give you a hit of 1 or 2% efficiency. Whereas in the high efficiency cells, its density is actually below the limits of deep level transient spectroscopy. So this is an example of a result that where this technique actually went beyond the sensitivity of deep level transient spectroscopy. And then by taking boron out of the system and doping it with gallium, they were able to show that they were able to get an efficiency increase that was comparable with the float zone silicon that they used. So also you get rid of that by using float zones. So that's another way to get away from using boron. But they were able to study this defect and show improvements based on that. So it's basically an emerging characterization technique, lifetime spectroscopy, and specifically it's sensitive to the lifetime limiting defect. And if your efficiency is limited by a defect, it's always going to be able to measure it. So that's one of the really nice things about it. It's not limited to the parts per billion of deep level transient spectroscopy. So right now, I'm doing work on extending this to 3-5 materials, and there'll probably be other work extending it to other material systems so that performance can be enhanced. Thanks.
Thank you, Martin. Any questions for Martin? Yes?
What kind of experiments, medical device do you need? You need like a good laser with a kind of range?
Yeah, so you can do it with a pulsed laser. So I'm doing it with luminescence measurements, photoluminescence decay.
What is the time scale? Is it microseconds?
It depends on the lifetime of your material. So with silicon, you can get away with something fairly long because it has microsecond lifetimes. I use a picosecond laser because I have 3-5 materials with kind of nanosecond lifetimes. But if you have a really defective material, your lifetime can get down to the nanoseconds or sub-nanoseconds, and then you might need a femtosecond laser for that kind of work.
I have a question. So, do you think you could, you're going to extend it to 3-5s, could you then correlate it with the ideality factor of a solar cell? And the N value?
So, like,
Just
the efficiency mean, or the
Yeah, well, ideality factor often it's somewhat linked to, it can be linked to deep level defects.
Yes. So, I mean, you could
vary, can lead to a larger N value or lower N value.
Yeah, so you could potentially use this kind of work to suss out the ratio of non-radiant recombination to radiant recombination, because you get some of the parameters, at least the dominant center. So that should be somewhat related to that.
I think you could.
Okay. Sorry about it, Nancy.